something happened there that was so radical that caused doubters to believe, that caused good, hard-working people to give their life. And they saw something that they gave everything for.
Hey, welcome to Unapologetic, and these are conversations that we hope will encourage you to share the reason for the hope that you have. My name is Tim. I'm here with Jono, and we're hitting another topic today, the first of our big topics, which is, did Jesus really rise from the dead? So, how are you feeling today, Jono?
Mate, feeling good, and so we're starting. This is, in my view, this is like the centerpiece of the apologetic questions.
Yeah.
So I know our first episode, we kind of unpacked, kind of a broad view of what is apologetic, why it's important, why it's for everyone and everyone should engage in it. And so, this opens up a huge field of discussion and conversations, around the evidence for faith, the why believe, what are the reasons for belief. So in my view, though, I can't avoid, this all hinges off really the ultimate question about the event that sparked all of this.
Yeah.
Which was the resurrection of Christ. So that, to my view, that's always a good place. Conversation will go there anyway, but why don't we start there as a footing for all of our other topics?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the resurrection.
We talked about this in terms of what do we start with? And I was kind of expecting if God is good, why is there pain and suffering? Or what's the evidence for the existence of God? And when you mention, hey, what about the resurrection of Jesus? I'm like, oh yeah. The question I did have about it was, I feel like, in my mind, it maybe wasn't necessarily the first question that a non-Christian might ask me. But then there's implications, right, of the resurrection that actually are far-reaching.
Yep.
Do you want to talk a bit to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, if the resurrection didn't happen, then we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
There'd be no Christianity. We wouldn't be talking about the Jewish scriptures as we know as the Old Testament. It wouldn't be a thing. Jesus would have just been another moral teacher from, that era.
Yeah.
It's the resurrection that's
just
centerpiece, right?
Centerpiece.
And if it's true, as we'll explore this, and the reasons that we can have pretty good confidence that it actually happened historically, then all bets are off.
Yeah.
Then the conversations about everything matter, because here is a unique event that's unique in the history of the world, and it's not just that it happened, but it's also what it means that impacts everything. So this isn't so much a theological conversation. To answer this, we're going to go to sociological conversations and historical conversations, and even right at the start, I mean, you look at the apostles, you look at their reason for faith. Arguably, they didn't go back and say, we have a water case argument for a literal 7-day creation, that the flood literally happened. That wasn't it for them. It was, their message was a resurrected Jesus.
Yeah.
And it was even the Apostle Paul. He wrote about this in I think it was 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah.
How did he put it? He said, literally, if Christ has not been raised from the dead. He said something, all the different translations are brewing here, but essentially saying our message is empty, so is your faith.
Yeah.
There is no faith. If it isn't for this, let's all pack up and go home.
Yeah.
They've got nothing to defend.
Yeah.
This all hinges off that the resurrection actually, not just a metaphysical thing, but they said, no, it bodily happened.
Yeah.
We touched him and saw him and heard him and felt him and ate with him.
Yeah.
And that's what sparked this whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's important before everything else. Let's start at the beginning. Can we trust that the resurrection happened? What are the reasons for the resurrection? This is a big deal.
So good. Let's get straight into it. What is the evidence for the resurrection?
Okay, so I went to Jerusalem, and there it is. This is a place that history, tradition, the Christian faith, all your textbooks, Roman literature from the first century, all point to the place. So that's a good starting point. There is an actual literal place you can visit that all of history points to. This is where the man walked and lived. This is his context. And you got the gospel accounts, right? when they were writing the Gospels, they weren't thinking we're writing 4 accounts here of the life of Jesus that are going to be compiled into a leather-bound book one day. We're going to talk about the Bible and why you can trust it in a later episode, which is a very important conversation. But that's not what they were doing with the Gospels. They were writing what they saw, right? They were writing what they heard, their experiences. And yes, of course, they had different audiences. This is specifically with your synoptic Gospels, what they all saw, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They went around interviewing eyewitnesses. And so at the very beginning, Christianity says fact check. They use dates, places, names. And these weren't things that were written at a later time, They were written in the era where the people were still there that could check their facts. So right at the heart, at the very beginning, Christianity was founded not off this is tricky to say, not off belief, but of what they saw.
Yeah.
They saw something. And it gave birth. Now, belief comes into what did that mean and who do we believe he then is, but it started with an event.
Yeah.
It didn't start with a book. It didn't start with the Bible.
Yeah.
It started with an event.
Because people say, like, I'm a Bible-believing Christian. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, you can say that. That's fine. But when you really pick apart that statement, it's like, well, that book was like, it came down to this thing that happened.
Something happened.
That then people talked about. Because if someone did something crazy, like...
Well, what were they witness of?
Well, Jesus' life. They knew him. They were friends with him. He had concentric circles of friends and family. But, yeah, then the guy...
Of his resurrection.
The guy was crucified publicly.
Yeah.
And then people saw him again.
Yep. So yeah, we're Bible-believing Christians. That's a theological discussion, right? Apologetics, about giving a defense for your faith. We're not dealing primarily in a theology, right? We're talking about what is the reason?
Evidence.
Yeah. What's the proofs? What's the evidence, right? And so that's why I think the first point is starting is what are the evidence for the resurrection? Well, to begin with, this whole thing, all the documents we have, that made the biblical canon that speak about this, write about it as an actual event that happened in an actual time, in an actual place, and the actual people there who witnessed it.
Eyewitnesses. So eyewitness accounts.
All right, so let's go to the first one. This is kind of gets into context, and this is important. So if someone's going, why do you trust the resurrection happened? Here's kind of a brief sweep over some of the things that are worth knowing. Okay, number one, who were the very first eyewitnesses?
Women.
They were women. Now, the reason that's important historically is around the first century in the Roman world, say in a court of law, if someone had to be a witness for like a crime or an incident, their testimonies weren't regarded as fact. So I want you to follow this train of thought for a moment. If this was a fallacy and Jesus was never resurrected from the dead and these guys were conspiring to begin a myth, they weren't saying that the resurrection was a metaphysical thing to believe in. Their claim was this happened.
Yeah.
So they were trying to propagate a factual event. So they wanted to establish that this was true and we could argue it that it was factual. If you were making that up and you wanted to convince people this was fact and you would write this down.
So in the first century, you wouldn't have
said, oh, the women were the first to see it, because that would have undermined your credibility.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we don't agree with that. It's preposterous now, but that's just how the culture was.
Yeah.
And so why then did they write down, and their testimony was the first to see him resurrected were women, unless
it actually happened
that's
like that.
how it happened.
Yeah.
So can you imagine them going, oh, people aren't going to believe this, but we can't lie.
Yeah.
So that's it. And then you can unpack that. So that's the first point, the fact that, and there's other little parts around that, but that's a really big one for anyone to understand context. The second thing you'll go to then is, okay, their accusation around, well, there was a suspicious motive around, they made this up, but there was a motive behind it, they were starting. Okay, so let's unpack that for a moment. From a logical perspective, let's use reason for a moment. If there was a motive behind making up a myth, all the first eyewitnesses, if there was a motive, their motive we can deduce was clearly, hey, let's ruin our lives. Let's lose our credibility. Let's all get burnt and sawn in two and crucified upside down.
Yeah.
So the argument is, they made it up. If you're going to make up something, you're going to get something from it, right?
Yeah.
But we see clearly
They
from
didn't
them.
get book deals.
Yeah, no. They didn't become, rulers and leaders of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And they lost everything. They lost they lost it all. And now you can imagine, okay, the last gospel account we have was from John, the apostle. He was an old man in prison for his faith.
Yeah.
Now you can imagine at that point, he'd seen all of his buddies killed for this.
It's crazy, isn't it?
And decades later, you think, surely, man, the gig's
Just
up. Give it up. He's there in
Everyone else
prison.
is
And
gone.
he's like, no. And he literally says, I'm writing them his words were what we saw and touched with our hand. We touched him.
Yeah.
We heard him. We ate with him.
Yeah.
We can't. And they went to the grave with this.
Yeah.
They lost everything. They lost families, homes, money, prestige, their very life for it. So again, motives. Again, this isn't theological. We're talking study of history and facts and digging beneath this.
Yeah.
The other one is, and it's a bit of a laugh, but do you have a brother?
I don't have a brother, but I have 3 sons. So
Okay.
I'm starting to work out how
So,
brothers work. You've got brothers.
I do have brothers. Shout out to my brothers.
Yeah.
Hey guys. What would it take for your brother to convince you that he was the Son of God and that he was God in a body? Because Jesus had
actually
brothers
so
and
funny
sisters.
thinking about
And
it.
we actually read in the gospel accounts that before his resurrection, his brothers didn't believe him.
Yeah.
Okay. And then after
Classic.
the resurrection, yeah, good.
Just
He got what he
Just follow the
deserved,
script.
Yeah, of course, my brother was going to get crucified by Romans. He's walking around his whole life claiming he was God's special child.
Yeah.
But then, who was one of the earliest leaders of the first century church? It was the brother of Jesus, James. In fact, we have one of his letters written in the New Testament, the Epistle of James. So, what would it take to convince your own brother? Well, if you see your brother crucified and then walking around again, it's like, well, that's why I laugh. If you read the introduction to James, his letter, the tone, it's very different to like Peter, John, Paul, which is very warm at the start. Greetings and love and grace to you. James, it's like he's the reluctant apostle. It's like, to everyone, hello. And then he gets into it. Count it joy when you fall into various trials, And we'll talk about trials in an upcoming episode. But so look, that's just another one. And there's other things like that. You just think practically, whoa, James became a believer?
Yeah.
Probably the final one worth thinking about, and hopefully there's enough to spark people's interest and curiosity, is now we don't have like physical evidence, and we'll discuss it again in a later episode, but what type of evidence we talk about when we talk about evidence. There isn't like, here is the DNA data of the body because he's resurrected. But what history does show us is that, around 30 AD, something happened. Christianity started somewhere. There was a spark that began this. So you strip back all the data of history, all the extra biblical resource we have from the historians during that. I mean, take guys like Josephus.
I was going to say, because I had no idea about this guy Josephus, and I haven't really even like read into his stuff, but I was just like, I remember the moment where I was like, oh, wow, yeah, other people were talking about Christians and this weird thing that had started, and they're a bit crazy, but they kind of actually look after each other in really interesting ways.
Correct.
And it's like, wow.
And Eusebius is another one, and there's a whole lot of I think it's Pliny the Elder or the Younger or something like that. You can Google that, but there's these wonderful extra biblical things that weren't written from believers that recorded about it. So what we know, obviously, Jesus lived and died like every other man. So that there's more written evidence about the historical fact that he lived than there was that Julius Caesar lived. And that's a cold hard fact.
Yeah.
So, but it's his resurrection. So something happened. History shows that there was something that was, number one, unprecedented.
Yeah.
Or else it wouldn't have been like a big deal. And something that doesn't ever happen. This was clearly a moment that, so you look back now, why we can't prove, like, look, the resurrection happened, look at that. You go, something happened there that was so radical that caused doubters to believe, that caused good, hard-working people to give their life. They saw something that they gave everything for. So again, just from stripping it back from a sociological, historical perspective, there's enough there to go, again, this isn't like a gotcha, but like these are reasons to trust that the resurrection actually happened.
Can you share that story about the professor?
Yeah.
that you were talking about, because that like head to heart thing,
Yeah.
and how Jesus kind of
This is why I think it's important to come back to beginning with Jesus when we talk about apologetics.
yeah
Because I know we'll wrestle with stuff like people talk about, can you believe in God in general, or why is there suffering, and what about the flood, and do you take the Bible as literal, all this stuff. I think though wrestling with the Jesus question is the primary one. And I was reminded of this. So I mentioned in the first episode, one of the events we run at Sophos Ministries, these events we do at university campuses called Logos Forums. And one of the evenings we were running at a particular university, I was having a public debate with a couple of professors. And after
you were nailing it, weren't you?
I was being owned, to be honest. I'm not going to lie. And I remember afterwards, as we were hanging out, I was having some just deep, to be honest, one-on-ones with this particular professor. And he was one of the smartest guys I've ever met. And
He was sharp.
He was sharp. And we were talking about, the nature of existence, metaphysics, and, why is there something other than nothing, and where does morality come from? Like big stuff. And like I was pulling out my best like moves, but nah, he knew his stuff. And I was just kind of praying, God, like, this is an amazing moment. This guy's like, we're being honest. We're having a really good conversation. But like, I'm getting nowhere. Like, can you help me out? Is there something? And I just felt that little nudge. Ask him about Jesus. It's like, what did I think of that? So I just go to him. I go, mate. Well, what do you make of Jesus? Instantly, the conversation changed.
Yeah.
His body language changed. His posture changed. The tone changed. Because then it got to his story. Because he loved Jesus. He'd read the Gospels. He couldn't floor the person of Jesus, and it troubled him because he's like, Jesus said some pretty radical stuff that I've got to come to terms with, and I do see there's good evidence for the resurrection, and so the conversation went to a whole nother level because it then no longer became this head thing; it became a heart thing, and he shared about some of his story, his pain in life, his desire for hope, his longing that the Jesus story was real.
Yeah, wow.
He wanted it to be real.
Wow.
So, which is a big part of apologetics. I think
that's that faith thing we were talking about last episode, right? Like you've got to get them to the point where they just like,
faith is necessary. I think this is an interesting thought, Tim. Sometimes before people are ready to wrestle with the idea whether Christianity is true or not, they've got to want it to be true. So there has to be enough in it that is like a balm to their soul. Like, I hope the Christian promise is real because, man, I care about my loved ones. I'm a little lost. All my rationality has kind of led me to nihilism and hopelessness, and there's so much evil and pain in the world. Please tell me you got a good answer for us.
Yeah.
So when we bring the conversation back to who Christ is, I feel like at times when it comes to Jesus, I don't need to defend him. He does a pretty good job of that himself, right? So it is important. I'm not defending Jesus. I'm there now giving an apologetic for why I believe in him. Yeah. And I have good reasons to believe that he was who he said he was. The resurrection confirmed it. I'm with the apostles, man. They believed not because they had firm answers about Genesis 1, 2, and 3, all the way to 11. I don't know where they stood on all that about in every detail, but I certainly know they were convinced that he was resurrected, and that changed everything.
Yeah.
That's why I believe.
That's
and
great.
From there, all bets are off.
That's great. Well, let's just wrap up with some resources that you'd recommend to people, and even just like, what are next steps? Like, what are some practical things you can do? And even in practice, like, how can I just be really missional around this subject of the resurrection?
Great. So something that helped me, again, begin this journey of like thinking through, the reasons for the resurrection. There's a couple of books, there's heaps, but the ones I would encourage people to start with, there's a beautiful author called Philip Yancey, and he wrote a book called The Jesus I Never Knew. And he wrote it from a perspective of being like an investigative journalist. Yeah. So he looks at the story of Jesus not through the lens of theology, but through history and that human perspective. And what would I have noticed if I was there at those moments with Jesus? It just helps to peel back the layer of 2,000 years of history and put yourself in the shoes of someone who would have seen Jesus alive, died, and resurrected. So, and the other one, a bit more dense, but story called The Case for Christ from Lee Strobel. Yeah. Well-known book. Again, they're two good places to start. Just to start getting your brain thinking as a historian a little bit, asking more sociological questions around why I can trust that Jesus was resurrected rather than just theological questions. And then that'll help you then return to, say, the scriptures with that view. So rather than just reading the Bible, for theology and for your own devotion and for revelation, you'll start to notice things you never noticed before. And hang on a second, because you'll start to look at it with eyes beyond just theology and belief and faith, but actually with, there's evidence here. There's a good Christian argument to be made about these events.
Yeah.
And I think then start to, again, returning to that passage from Peter, be prepared to give an answer. Start practicing. Have a go at chatting about this and talking about why do you believe in Jesus? What is it about his evidence in his life? And that will start to, cultivate you thinking in a fresh way about this, and it'll start to develop the answers for the reason for the hope that you have.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jono. Hope that's been helpful to you guys. And stay tuned for next episode, because we are going to address, can I trust the Bible?
Brilliant.
See you then.